At 60 years old, I'd finally learned to appreciate the parts of life that didn't come with alarms, deadlines, or someone yelling my last name across a motor pool. Retirement had a funny way of slowing down your hearing for complaints but sharpening it for the good stuff. Like the soft hiss of sprinklers starting at dawn, or the gentle clatter of a neighbor dragging their trash bin a little too early on a Saturday. Those were sounds I'd grown to depend on. The background rhythm of a quiet Midwestern suburb that promised peace as long as you didn't look directly at the HOA bulletin board. Most mornings started the same. Me sitting on my back porch with a mug of coffee strong enough to wake the dead, watching sunlight crawl over my lawn like it had nowhere else to be. Birds fussed at each other in the hedges. Somewhere down the street, old Mr. Jenkins revved his lawnmower at precisely 7:01 a.m., as if he'd been waiting all night to fire it up. And next door, Mrs. Parker pretended to stretch while strategically angling herself to peek over fences like a suburban meerkat. In any other place she'd be a spy. Here she was just bored. Life was good, simple, predictable. A welcome contrast to the years I'd spent in the army, where sleeping in meant not getting shot at before breakfast. Now, sleeping in just meant ignoring the mailman's overly enthusiastic knock. And for the past 5 years, I'd kept my house the way I preferred it. Neat, modest, and just rebellious enough to irritate the HOA without giving them ammunition. Or so I thought. But the truth is, peace is a fragile thing, especially in neighborhoods where people care more about lawn height than actual human decency. And it all started with something simple. Something so harmless it almost felt ridiculous that it became the spark that lit the entire valley on fire. Corn. Not acres of it. Not a field that could feed a small country. Just 8 stalks. 8. I'd planted them in the back corner near the old oak tree, partly out of nostalgia and partly because the smell of fresh soil in spring still made me feel like that kid who used to help his father in the fields decades ago. Those moments stuck with me. Me handing him seeds, him patting my shoulder, both of us sweaty under the sun but happy. So that spring, after noticing a dusty pack of corn seeds at the hardware store, I figured, why not? Tiny patch. A memory, really. Something to tinker with between morning coffee and afternoon boredom. I wasn't aiming to start a farm or run a black market vegetable cartel. I just wanted to watch something grow that wasn't a cholesterol number or the HOA's list of rules. And for a while, that corner of the yard felt like its own small universe. Every morning I'd check the sprouts, lightly water them, maybe move a stray leaf or two. It was peaceful, therapeutic, and for the first few weeks, not a single soul in the neighborhood even noticed. Not Mrs. Parker, not HOA President Linda Wallace, not the retired guy across the street who always complained about everyone else's landscaping while his looked like a sad desert. But peace doesn't survive long around people with too much free time and clipboards. The first sign of trouble came in the form of pointed conversations that weren't supposed to sound pointed. Mrs. Parker paused at the fence one afternoon, doing her best impression of casual interest. "Oh, plants. Yep. What kind?" "Corn." Her eyebrows shot up high enough to touch her visor. "Corn. Just a few stalks. Nothing dramatic." She nodded, but in that slow, suspicious way people nod when pretending they aren't planning to report you to someone with a laminated badge. Then came the whispers. Not loud enough to be real confrontations, cowardly little drive-by comments. "Is he growing a farm back there? Does he think he lives in Kansas?" My cousin said corn attracts raccoons with rabies. I ignored it. A man can only waste so much energy on nonsense. And honestly, life was too pleasant to assume the worst. My days were filled with simple joys. Cleaning tools in the garage, chatting with the mailman, grilling on Fridays. The sort of routine that lets your shoulders drop from your ears and reminds you breathing doesn't have to be stressful. But red flags don't wave themselves. Someone has to lift them. One morning, with the sky still pale and the air chilly enough to wake you up without coffee, I found an envelope tucked halfway into my front door. Not in the mailbox where normal mail goes. No, this one had been placed with intention. A silent warning. Thick paper HOA letterhead, that irritating serif font they used to make their threats feel classy. I stood on the porch reading it, scratching my jaw as the sun rose behind me. Notice of violation. Unauthorized agricultural growth. I actually looked around the neighborhood, wondering if this was meant for someone else. Me? An unauthorized agricultural grower? I hadn't felt that dangerous since I accidentally set a MRE heater on fire 20 years earlier. The letter went on to explain that my corn, my 8 tiny stalks, violated Section 14, subsection C, paragraph 3, a rule that apparently prevented crops exceeding 24 inches in non-designated agricultural zones. Non-designated agricultural zones? This was a backyard in a suburb, not a national park. It would have been funny if it wasn't so absurd. But standing there, watching my coffee steam into the cool morning air, reading legal jargon about vegetables, the irritation set in slowly, like a mosquito whining near your ear. You don't react at first. You tell yourself to ignore it, but you know you won't. I refolded the letter, slipped it back into the envelope, and stared at it for a long moment. Not anger, not yet, just disbelief. People battle over fences, noise, parking spots, but corn? That letter, ridiculous as it was, shifted something deep inside me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the principle of the thing. Or maybe it was the knowledge that common sense had officially taken a vacation from this neighborhood. Whatever it was, I knew right then, that letter changed everything. I didn't respond to that first violation letter. Not because I was intimidated, but because I was raised to believe that stupidity usually collapses under its own weight if you give it enough time. Unfortunately, my HOA, specifically our president, Linda Wallace, had the structural integrity of a cockroach. Stupidity didn't collapse. It metastasized. 3 days after the unauthorized agricultural growth notice, I stepped out onto my driveway to find 2 people I recognized all too well. Linda, armed with a clipboard like it was a holy relic, and her ever-anxious sidekick, the HOA treasurer, Barry. Barry always looked like he'd been caught stealing cookies, even when he wasn't. Especially when he wasn't. They were standing by the curb, pointing at my backyard like explorers discovering a hostile new continent. "Morning," I said, trying to sound friendly. Nothing irritates an HOA more than politeness. Linda didn't return the greeting. She simply cleared her throat with the confidence of someone who enjoys making grocery store employees cry. "We've received reports," she began, "that your plants have increased in height." Plants, increased in height. The natural function of all flora, apparently now a crime under Section 14. "They're corn," I said. "That's what they do." Barry scribbled something on his clipboard like I'd confessed to smuggling endangered timber through customs. Linda ignored him. "We'll need photographic documentation for the board meeting." She turned slightly. "Barry." Barry lifted his phone and snapped pictures with the enthusiasm of a confused dad trying to capture fireworks. At one point he zoomed in so close on a leaf that he almost fell into the garden. "Perfect," he said. "These will go in your file." "My file?" I asked. "I have a file?" Linda smiled thinly. "All homeowners do." That explained a lot. I suddenly understood why she always looked like she knew everyone's secrets. She probably alphabetized them between snack breaks. I watched them trot off to harass someone else, and I thought maybe that would be the end of it. They'd taken their photos. They'd felt important. Maybe the universe would reward me with peace. The universe laughed in my face. 2 days later, another envelope arrived. This one had the bold red letters "Second Notice" stamped across the front like I'd evaded capture. Inside were the usual threats: fines, hearings, forced compliance. But the language had evolved somehow. The letter now accused me of operating a mid-scale agricultural production operation. 8 plants. Mid-scale production. I sat on the porch rubbing my temples. Maybe the HOA handbook had been written by someone who'd never seen a farm or possibly a vegetable. I called my friend Dave to vent. Dave was the kind of guy who offered advice like it was candy, mostly stale, mostly harmless. "Just tear it up," he said between bites of what sounded like chips. "HOAs only win if you let them." "Dave, they think I'm running a corn cartel. Free popcorn, man." I hung up. Dave wasn't helpful. That afternoon, things escalated from annoying to surreal. I heard rustling on the side of the house and walked out to find Mrs. Parker. Spandex, visor, giant sunglasses. Stretching again. Except this time she was holding her phone up like she was recording an action movie. "Oh," she said, pretending to be startled. "Didn't see you." "Hi, Mrs. Parker. Filming something?" "Just documenting potential neighborhood hazards." "Hazards?" She nodded seriously. "Corn can attract rodents. So can bird feeders," I said. "You have 3. That's different." "Why?" She paused. "Because mine are tasteful." I stared at her, unsure if she was joking. She wasn't. Later that evening, I went for a walk to clear my head. On the way back, I noticed the HOA clubhouse bulletin board had a fresh sheet of paper pinned front and center. Notice of noncompliance, 113 Willow Creek Lane. My address, my name, and beneath it, in bold, "Owner continues to violate HOA guidelines regarding unauthorized agricultural activity." Below that was a small, grainy picture of my corn. The way they'd cropped it made it look like a jungle. A couple walking their dogs stopped to look. "Is that corn?" the woman whispered. "Looks illegal," the man replied. "Illegal? Corn." I'd defended the country for decades, and somehow this was the threat to suburbia? The next morning brought the worst blow yet. A $300 fine taped to my front door. Not mailed. Not handed to me. Taped. Slapped there like a bounty posting from the Old West. The letter claimed I had ignored previous warnings and that the HOA would now take appropriate action if the corn remained. Appropriate action? What were they going to do? Raid the cob stash. I took the fine into the kitchen, poured myself another cup of coffee, and stared at it like it was written in ancient runes. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even frustrated. I was impressed. Truly impressed. It takes a special kind of dedication to be this petty before breakfast. But the day wasn't done humiliating me. Around noon, a landscaping truck pulled up in front of my house. I watched from the window as 2 guys hopped out, one holding a clipboard. They knocked. "Sir," the man said, "we're here to perform a forced vegetation removal." "Forced?" I repeated. He shrugged. "HOA hired us." I stepped outside. "Well, you can turn right around. You're not touching my corn." The men exchanged uncomfortable glances. They weren't the enemy. Just 2 guys trying to earn a paycheck without becoming casualties in someone else's nonsense war. One tilted his head toward the yard. "Can we at least look at it? We kinda have to check it off the list." "Fine," I said. "Look." They walked over, stared at the corn silently for a moment, then looked at each other. "It's just corn," one whispered. "Yeah," the other said. "I thought it'd be taller." They left shaking their heads. Couldn't blame them. But by then, the humiliation was complete. The HOA had made my yard a public crime scene over vegetables. And everyone in the neighborhood, every walker, every jogger, every bored retiree, now knew me as the corn guy. That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, the same sentence kept circling through my head. This can't be real. Yet it was. And somewhere deep inside me, irritation began to harden into something firmer. Resolve. I tried to push the feeling aside. Told myself it wasn't worth the fight. Told myself to just cut it down and move on. Then, just as I was drifting off to sleep, my phone buzzed. A text notification. From an unknown number. The message read, "Expect further enforcement action. This is your final warning." Not signed. Not professional. Not legal. And that was the moment I knew this wasn't just about corn anymore. This was about the principle. And I was done being polite. By the next morning, my mind wasn't on coffee, or sprinklers, or even the corn. It was on that anonymous text. The tone of it, half threat, half smugness, hit a nerve I hadn't felt in years. Not anger. No, anger is fast and hot. This was slower, heavy. The kind of weight that settles on your chest when someone thinks they can push you around and get away with it. I've always believed in picking battles carefully. Life gives you plenty of opportunities to fight, but wisdom comes from knowing when something actually matters. And as ridiculous as it sounded even in my own head, this mattered. The HOA had crossed a line, and not because of 8 stalks of corn, but because they had decided they owned the right to intimidate me. They had mistaken my calm for weakness. They thought a retired mechanic with a quiet yard was an easy target. They were wrong. I didn't plan anything dramatic at first. My version of rebellion started with a ladder and a trip to the attic. There, under a thick layer of dust and forgotten Christmas decorations, sat a leather-bound binder I hadn't opened in decades. My grandfather had given it to me before he passed, saying, "You'll know when you need this." Back then, I thought it was just sentimental clutter, something old folks passed down to feel immortal. But as I carried it downstairs and set it on the dining table, I felt a familiarity. Like the weight wasn't just physical. The cover was cracked, worn at the spine, and the initials RC were pressed into the leather. My great-grandfather's initials, Raymond Caldwell. He'd owned land, a lot of it, enough that people whispered he was the reason the town existed at all. But family stories blur over time, turning facts into folklore. I never put much stock into tales about the valley that belonged to us, or how he'd never sold an inch. It all sounded exaggerated, the way memories often are. Still, something nudged me to open the binder. The first few pages were old photographs, sepia-toned images of my great-grandfather on a mule, standing in a stretch of open land. In one photo he held a rolled document in one hand and a pipe in the other, looking proud enough to burst. A folded letter was tucked behind the picture. It was dated 1894 and written in the type of elegant script no human alive seems capable of anymore. Charter of Land Rights, Caldwell Valley. The name hit me like a slap. Caldwell Valley. I'd grown up hearing the name. Teachers mentioned it in local history. My grandmother talked about it when she was feeling nostalgic. But I had never connected it to here. My neighborhood was built on a section of the old valley. Hands steady, I began flipping through legal pages. Deeds, maps, signatures. The further I went, the stranger it all felt. The documents weren't just old. They were specific, painfully specific. Land boundaries, mineral rights, transfer agreements. And then I found the page that made me sit back in my chair and whisper, "You've got to be kidding me. This land is vested in perpetuity to the Caldwell family line unless explicitly transferred by written and notarized deed. Lease agreements may be permitted. Ownership shall remain unchanged. Perpetuity. Never sold. Never transferred." Which meant the land beneath this entire subdivision still belonged to my family. I stared at the clause again, reading each word slowly. Lease agreements permitted. Ownership unchanged. The town had leased the valley to developers long ago, but the land itself was never sold. My house, my yard, every house around me, all technically sat on Caldwell land. I let out a low whistle. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. The HOA, with all its bluster and bylaws and letters about unauthorized agricultural activity, didn't even own the dirt their high heels were clicking on. They were enforcing regulations on land that wasn't under their authority. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. Almost. But instead, I picked up my phone and dialed the county clerk's office. "Hi," I said when a tired voice answered. "I have a question about land deeds." The clerk sounded like she'd been awake since the Reagan administration. "Sir, that is a very broad question." I explained what I had, what it said, and how old it was. She grew more alert with every sentence. "A land charter from 1894? She repeated. Do you have the original?" "Yes." "Can you bring it in?" 2 hours later, I was standing at her counter. She handled the binder with the kind of respect usually reserved for museum artifacts. After making photocopies and checking digital records, she finally nodded thoughtfully. "Sir," she said, "this charter is still valid. It was never revoked, never sold, and never contested. So what does that mean for my property?" She smiled, and it was the kind of smile someone gives right before handing you a winning lottery ticket. "It means the land is yours. All of it. Legally. The HOA can regulate structures, but they have zero jurisdiction over the land. They can't enforce fines or removal of vegetation if the land isn't under their authority. I blinked. So my corn is legal? More legal than their fines, sir. Walking out of the county office, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Satisfaction. Not the petty kind, not gloating. Just a bone-deep knowing that justice, simple, reasonable justice, was still possible. When I got home, I didn't storm into the HOA office. I didn't photocopy deeds and tape them to their clubhouse. I didn't post dramatic revelations online. Instead, I went to the garage. I cleaned off my workbench. I laid out the deeds in chronological order. I labeled each page. I made a neat packet, and I placed the original binder back in its drawer, safe and untouched. If the army taught me anything, it was how to prepare paperwork that scared people more than shouting ever could. As I worked, a calm settled over me. A confident calm. The kind that comes from holding the high ground, literally and legally. This wasn't going to be a confrontation of fists or yelling. No drama. No theatrics. This would be quiet, precise, unshakable. By late afternoon, everything was ready. Copies made. Notes highlighted. Timeline prepared. The HOA wanted a battle over authority? Fine. But they were about to learn that authority begins with ownership. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt excited. Almost giddy. They had no idea what was coming. And truth be told, neither did I. I didn't have to wait long for the HOA to make their next move. Early the next morning, before the sun even had the courtesy to rise properly, I heard the unmistakable sound of hurried, angry footsteps on my driveway. 3 sets. One sharp and fast, Linda's heels. One shuffling, Barry's defeated gait. And one heavier and purposeful, probably the HOA vice president, Cheryl, who always looked like she was one bad day away from filing a noise complaint against Oxygen. I was sipping my coffee by the kitchen window when I saw them marching toward my front door. Their expressions looked like they'd spent all night practicing synchronized disapproval. Linda had a manila envelope tucked under her arm, and a grim sense of purpose on her face. Barry looked like a hostage. Cheryl looked like someone who'd personally lost money betting my corn wouldn't survive the week. They didn't knock. They hammered. I opened the door slowly, not to be dramatic, but because I was genuinely curious what level of nonsense they were bringing now. "Good morning," I said, smiling politely. Linda didn't return the smile. "We're escalating enforcement action. On corn. On your continued defiance," she corrected sharply. "You were warned. Multiple times." Barry nodded timidly, as though nodding was the only thing keeping the universe from collapsing. Linda thrust the envelope toward me. "This is your final notice. If you do not comply, we have the authority to proceed with forced removal. We have contacted enforcement." I blinked. Enforcement. And right then, because the universe has a wicked sense of timing, a police cruiser turned onto my street. Barry gasped. Cheryl folded her arms triumphantly. Linda smirked like she had personally summoned divine justice into the cul-de-sac. I looked at the cruiser, then at the 3 of them. "You called the police to seize corn?" "It falls under unauthorized property modification," Linda said smugly. "No, it falls under vegetables," I corrected. The cruiser slowed and pulled up to my driveway. The officer stepped out. A younger guy, mid-30s, friendly face. Posture that suggested he had already concluded his life choices did not prepare him for this moment. "Morning," he said, a bit sheepishly. "We got a call about, a situation?" Linda stepped forward like she was accepting an Oscar. "Officer, this homeowner is in clear violation of HOA regulations. We are requesting immediate removal of the illegal agricultural growth." The officer blinked. "Ma'am, you called us about corn?" "Yes," she said. "It is a public safety issue." I almost laughed. Barry looked like he wanted to. Cheryl was holding herself together through sheer pettiness. The officer stared at them for a long second. Then he turned to me. "Can I see the plants?" "Sure," I said, leading him to the backyard. We walked past my deck, around the side, and toward the infamous 8 stalks. The officer paused in front of them with a bewildered expression. "That's it?" he asked. "Yep." He scratched his chin. I was expecting, I don't know, a field. Or something dangerous. Dangerous corn, I said. Scariest kind. The officer huffed a small laugh. Then the HOA trio came storming up behind us. There, Linda said, pointing dramatically. As you can see, he is operating a mid-scale agricultural production site. Mid-scale, I repeated quietly. 8 plants. The bylaws are clear, Linda argued. Absolutely no crops above 24 inches. The officer squinted at the corn. Looks about 2 feet? It's 31 inches. Cheryl snapped. Barry began measuring with his hands like he was comparing fish lengths. The officer sighed, clearly wishing he'd chosen a different career. Look, I'm not sure what you expect me to do here. Remove it, Linda said. Immediately. Ma'am, he said gently. This is a civil matter, not a police matter. No, she insisted. He is in violation of our authority. I pulled out the folder I'd prepared, flipping it open like a magician, revealing his final trick. Funny you should mention authority, I said, handing the officer a copy of the 1894 Land Charter. He frowned, scanned it, then raised both eyebrows. This is real. It is, I said. Verified yesterday by the county clerk. He read more, eyes widening. Sir, you own the land under the entire valley? Yep. He turned to Linda. Ma'am, you do know your HOA has no jurisdiction over the land itself, right? Only the structures. Linda's face went white. Barry actually swayed. Cheryl's jaw dropped so far I could have planted corn in it. That can't be right, Linda sputtered. We have full enforcement rights. The officer shook his head. Not if the HOA never acquired land rights. These deeds clearly state ownership never transferred. You could have heard a sprinkler needle drop. Now, before the officer continued, this was the perfect emotional choke point. Neighborhood gossip buzzing. HOA humiliated. Tension sky high. So I leaned on the porch railing and slipped in the one moment you specifically asked for. And right about here, when the cops were standing in my yard trying to decide whether they had to arrest corn, I've got to ask, have you ever dealt with an HOA like this? Drop your story in the comments. Hit subscribe if you love a good poetic justice moment. And let's see how many survivors of neighborhood petty tyranny we've got. And just like that, we go straight back into the story, no pause, no break. The officer closed the folder and handed it back to me. Ma'am, he said, turning to Linda with the calm pity of someone addressing a very confused toddler. You have no grounds for enforcement. Not on this property. Not on this land. But, she stammered. But we sent notices. Invalid, he said. We issued fines. Illegal. We demanded removal. He shook his head. You can't force compliance on land you don't have jurisdiction over. Then came the moment I'll never forget. The officer turned to me and said, Sir, your corn is perfectly legal. You're free to grow as much as you like. Barry made a noise like a deflating balloon. Cheryl muttered, I knew we shouldn't listen to her. And Linda, HOA President Linda, stood frozen, eyes flicking between me, the officer, and the corn like she was watching her kingdom collapse in real time. I almost felt bad. Almost. The officer tipped his hat, nodded politely, and left them standing there. And that's when the meltdown really began. Neighbors peeked through blinds. Someone recorded the whole thing from across the street. Mrs. Parker stood on her porch with binoculars like she was observing migrating birds. Linda turned to me, furious and pale. This isn't over, she snapped. Oh, I said gently. I think it might be, because later that afternoon, I received a letter from the county confirming exactly what the officer had said, and something even worse for the HOA. They weren't just wrong. They were operating outside their legal authority entirely. And that letter? Well, that letter changed everything again. The letter from the county arrived in a crisp white envelope, the kind that looks official before you even open it. I took it inside, sat at the kitchen table, and slid it open carefully, half expecting it to glow like a treasure chest. It didn't, but the contents hit just as hard. The county not only confirmed that my 1894 land charter was fully valid, but they also went the extra mile to outline, in plain English, that the HOA had zero jurisdiction over my land. Not partial. Not conditional. Zero. Even better, the letter pointed out that any enforcement actions the HOA had taken, fines, notices, threats, constituted misapplication of authority, and could, if I chose to push it, be labeled as harassment. I sat back, letting the information sink in. All their posturing, all their threats, all their clipboards and bylaws and emergency meetings. Invalid. Every ounce of frustration they'd caused me, officially legally pointless. And I wasn't even mad anymore. Once paperwork does the heavy lifting, anger becomes unnecessary. I folded the letter neatly, placed it in my folder of documentation, and thought, all right, let's end this the right way. But I didn't go charging toward the HOA office like a vigilante. No, that's not how men my age operate. I simply walked outside, watered my corn like it was any other day, and waited. Because nothing spreads through a suburban neighborhood faster than a juicy story, especially one involving a cop, a meltdown, and an HOA president who had been publicly corrected by an officer half her age. Took exactly 40 minutes. At 9:52 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. HOA requests an immediate meeting regarding your property. No greeting. No apology. No name. They could have at least pretended to be polite. I replied, sure, my place. Noon. 3 minutes later, another message arrived. We prefer clubhouse. I responded, my place. Landowner's prerogative. They didn't argue after that. Noon rolled around and I made myself a sandwich. Not delicately, not quietly. I wanted them to hear me chewing when they showed up because petty satisfaction is still satisfaction. That's when their shadows crossed my porch. Linda, looking like she'd aged 15 years overnight. Cheryl, arms folded like she was participating in her own hostage negotiation. And poor Barry, who'd apparently abandoned hope somewhere around sunrise. Come on in, I said. Kitchen's fine. They gathered awkwardly around the table. I didn't offer them chairs at first. Considering how they'd treated me, they could earn the privilege of sitting. Linda cleared her throat. We have reviewed the situation. Situation. That's what she called it. And, she continued stiffly, it appears there may have been some misunderstanding regarding jurisdiction. A misunderstanding? I echoed, raising one eyebrow. She swallowed. Yes. I let the silence sit just long enough for Barry to fidget and Cheryl to sigh in defeat. So, Linda pushed forward. We have decided to rescind all fines issued to your address. Good, I said, because they were illegal. Barry flinched like I'd slapped him with the word illegal. And, Linda continued, we are officially withdrawing all enforcement actions related to your property. All of them. I asked just to watch her say it. She nodded, jaw clenched. All. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Not revenge, but responsibility. See, when someone in power abuses it, you don't just want them corrected. You want the future protected. So I grabbed the folder, opened it calmly, and slid the county's letter across the table. I need you to sign a written acknowledgement, I said, that you understand your authority does not extend to this land, or to any vegetation or ground-based decisions on it. Cheryl shifted uncomfortably. Is that necessary? Yes, I said. Given your track record? Absolutely. Linda opened the letter, her eyes scanning it with mounting horror. I could practically hear the sound of her ego deflating like a tire running over a nail. We'll sign it, she finally said. But we would appreciate that this stays internal. I leaned back, taking a slow sip of coffee. That depends entirely on whether you stay in your lane from now on. Barry nodded vigorously. We will. We definitely will. Then came the part one didn't expect. Cheryl cleared her throat. Also, the board has decided that, in light of recent oversteps, Linda will be stepping down as HOA president. Linda's jaw dropped. Excuse me? It's been discussed, Cheryl said calmly. We need new leadership. I almost felt sympathy. Almost. But then I remembered the threats, the fines, the anonymous texts, and the way she'd weaponized authority without hesitation. Linda stood up abruptly. "Fine," she hissed. "But I won't be humiliated like this." Too late. She stormed out of my house, chin trembling, heels poking dents in my walkway. Barry bowed his head and followed. Cheryl lingered for a second, then sighed. "I'm sorry for all of this," she said quietly. I nodded. "Do better moving forward." She nodded in return and left. After they were gone, the quiet in my house felt different. Not just peaceful, cleared, like air after a storm. But the real payoff didn't come from paperwork or signatures or resignations. Came that evening, at 6:15 p.m., right around the time folks finish dinner and wander out onto their porches. The entire neighborhood seemed to come alive with whispers. People strolling dogs paused on the sidewalk. Kids on bikes slowed to stare into my yard. And from across the street, someone shouted, "Hey, he won." Not exactly subtle, but accurate. Then, as if scripted, my neighbor Dan walked over carrying a giant bowl of popcorn. "For the corn guy," he said, handing it over with a grin. I laughed. "Appreciate it." Word kept spreading. People waved. Some congratulated me. A few even asked about growing their own corn next year. The best part? No one said it sarcastically. They were genuinely happy to see someone stand up to the HOA. Later, as twilight settled over the valley, I walked out to the little patch of corn. Sunlight glowed behind it, casting tall golden shadows on the grass. My father used to say that the measure of a man wasn't how loudly he fought, but how persistently he stood his ground. So I reached up, touched one of the leaves, and whispered, "We did it, Dad." A soft breeze rustled through the stalks, almost like an answer. And as I took a step back, admiring the tiny corner of land that caused a full-scale suburban meltdown, a strange and satisfying peace settled over me. Not the fragile peace from before, but a sturdy one. Earned. The next morning, the HOA sent one final envelope, this one handwritten, shaky, and almost apologetic. "We regret any distress caused by your vegetation." Vegetation. I couldn't help it. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. Poetic justice doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it comes in the form of 8 stalks of corn standing tall, a neighborhood full of newfound respect, and the knowledge that the quiet man they underestimated owned the ground beneath their feet. Literally. And the best part? The corn wasn't even my biggest victory. It was the principle. And that principle had finally been served, fresh, clean, and sweet as summer. Peace in a suburban neighborhood doesn't arrive with trumpets or announcements. It comes quietly, tiptoeing in like a shy houseguest, usually right after the chaos packs its bags and leaves. In the days following the HOA meltdown, that's exactly what happened. The tension that had been humming through the cul-de-sac for weeks dissolved into something softer, calmer, almost friendly. Almost. The first true sign of peace came the morning after Linda's resignation. I stepped outside with my coffee, expecting to see her marching up and down the street in protest, maybe clutching her clipboard like a fallen general still trying to win the war. But her blinds stayed closed. Her car stayed parked. Her porch, which had previously displayed her personality like a warning sign, stayed empty. Felt symbolic, like the neighborhood itself took a deep breath. The second sign of peace came from the neighbors. Suddenly, the people who barely made eye contact before were waving, smiling, and striking up conversations as if I'd saved the entire subdivision from an alien invasion. Dan, the popcorn guy, waved every morning while watering his lawn. His wife, Marlene, baked me a loaf of banana bread as a token of support, though she winked and added, "And because Barry told everyone at the clubhouse that the HOA tried to arrest corn." The way she said it made me wonder if banana bread had ever been weaponized before. Kids biking by would shout, "Corn guy!" in a tone that wasn't mocking anymore, but celebratory, like I was a local legend, the folk hero of Willow Creek Lane. Even the mailman, who wasn't the chatty type, delivered my mail with a knowing grin. "Heard you won a war," he said. "Congratulations. Not many folks beat an HOA." I shrugged. I had help. From corn, he joked. From documents, I said, taking the letters. He laughed all the way back to his truck. But peace never arrives without leaving reminders of the storm that came before. And those reminders came in the form of two things: the quiet aftermath inside the HOA board, and the subtle shift in how people treated rules. The HOA, without Linda's iron grip, was suddenly a gentler beast. Notices became friendlier. Warnings turned into reminders. Meetings were described as optional discussions. They even swapped out the bitter, choking clubhouse coffee for something drinkable, maybe symbolic, maybe a peace offering. Cheryl stopped me during a walk one afternoon. She was wearing walking shoes instead of her usual stiff dress shoes, and she looked human. Tired, but human. I just wanted to say, she began, "Thank you." For what? For handling everything the way you did. You could have destroyed us. Legally, I mean, but you didn't. I shrugged. Didn't need to. Lessons land harder when people figure them out on their own. She nodded, absorbing that. We're rewriting the bylaws, she said quietly, making them more reasonable. Good, I said. People shouldn't be afraid of their own neighborhood. She gave me a soft smile and walked on. And just like that, the shift became permanent. The HOA was no longer a looming threat. It was a mildly annoying background noise. Like a buzzing lamp you forget is buzzing once you've lived with it long enough. But the real change happened inside me. I'd always considered myself a calm man, collected, reasonable, a problem solver rather than a problem starter. But the corn battle showed me something I didn't expect. Sometimes standing up isn't about yelling, or fighting, or proving a point. Sometimes it's about quietly, firmly reminding people you know your worth, and you won't let them trample it. It reminded me of the army, not the battles or the stress or the camaraderie, though those memories came back too, but the lesson my sergeant drilled into us when we were young and eager to fight everything. You don't need to bark to lead. You just need to stand when others don't. That's what the corn had become, a stand. A silly, small, vegetable-based stand. One evening, about a week after everything happened, I sat on my back porch watching fireflies blink over the grass. My corn, now taller and swaying gently, rustled in the breeze like they were whispering secrets from the past. I tilted my chair back, letting the quiet settle over me. The kind of quiet that feels earned. Honest. A far cry from the suffocating silence that comes before conflict. This was peaceful, balanced, and as I sat there, my mind wandered to the idea of fate. How strange it was that something as trivial as a dusty pack of seeds could turn into a showdown that shifted the entire tone of a neighborhood. Life is funny that way. The smallest actions carry the most unexpected consequences. Of course, suburbia being suburbia, peace didn't mean perfection. The neighborhood Facebook group was still a circus. People still argued about mailbox colors, and whether a cat wandering outside was free-roaming wildlife. Mrs. Parker kept stretching near her fence line, though now she waved politely every time she caught me watching her. Even Barry, poor Barry, still managed to look perpetually guilty even when he was doing nothing at all. But the edge was gone. The fear, the pressure, the tyranny disguised as community standards. And that's what made the final moment of closure so satisfying. It happened on a Wednesday morning, cool, breezy. The kind of day when sunlight feels like a soft blanket. I was sitting outside trimming a few stray branches when a new letter arrived. Not from the HOA. Not from the county. From a neighbor.